Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out my channel. I really appreciate it. Please click to subscribe. Still so many questions about the Charlie Kirk assassination, about Tyler Robinson, the suspect, about what his defense may be. He's now got two extremely experienced attorneys from California. What holes are they going to try to poke into the investigation? I'm digging into all of it in this edition of Brian Entin Investigates. So Tyler Robinson hasn't said anything since he was arrested for assassinating Charlie Kirk. He needs a public defender, which means that taxpayers will be the ones who pay for his defense. Essentially, he cannot afford his own attorney. But if you think he's getting like some young, inexperienced public defender, it is actually not the case at all. It is literally the total opposite. Two extremely experienced criminal defense attorneys from California have been added to his legal team. So the man accused of killing Charlie Kirk has two prominent California attorneys. They will now be flying in to represent him, and it's all paid for by taxpayers. He is entitled to a competent defense, and this is a death penalty case. And the state of Utah, they are the ones forking over the money to pay for his defense. That is just how it works with our American system. I know some people might be like, wow, but that's the way the system works. Michael Burt from San Francisco and Richard Novak from Pasadena, California, they are now on the case helping his Utah attorney, Kathy Nestor. Michael Burt has over 50 years, just about 50 years of experience in criminal defense. And one of his former clients will sound very, very familiar, Lyle Menendez. Burt actually represented Menendez during their brother's first trial back in 1993. As for Richard Novak, he's been a lawyer since about, I think it was 1990, so 35 years experience. He's worked more than 24 death penalty cases, and that's a lot for one attorney, 24 death penalty cases. And Utah attorney Kathy Nestor is a top attorney in Utah and even worked for the Obama administration. One of her notorious clients may also sound familiar, Corey Richins. Remember Corey Richins? She's the mom accused of murdering her husband before writing a children's book. Remember that also happened in Utah. So it is clear that Tyler Robinson has really an A-list defense team, a very, very experienced defense team. And a lot are starting to question, like, what is all of this going to cost? And it's not going to be cheap. Utah County initially approved $1 million for additional staffing for the prosecution and the defense, but that number is expected to go up by a lot. Death penalty cases, they can go on for years and years and years. And with high-profile attorneys like Robinson's, these guys coming in from California, you can expect them to fight. And they're also going to be looking for holes in the case, which is something that I'm really going to focus on in this episode. They're looking for areas that law enforcement and then investigators made mistakes. Now, granted, there's a lot of evidence there. A lot of the evidence is obviously strong against Robinson. I've been covering it. And remember, there's a lot that we don't even know about. When you get a probable cause affidavit or there's press conferences, usually that's just really the basics. Usually they know a lot more behind the scenes. Think about Kohberger. I mean, we got the probable cause, which was complete, but then later learned that they had way more that they just didn't put in the probable cause, which could also be the case here with Tyler Robinson. Remember those text messages, however strange so many think that they are, between Robinson and his romantic partner, where he essentially admits that he did it. Those are obviously pretty damning. FBI director also said that Kash Patel also said that they have DNA connecting him to the scene. So it's serious evidence, but some are already pointing to inconsistencies in the timeline, holes that the defense can look into. The timeline is going to be key. Also, when he apparently came back to the scene where he left the murder weapon, questions already about whether body cameras were rolling. These are all things that the defense can look into. I'm going to talk to Guy D'Andrea, a former Pennsylvania prosecutor. He's now a civil trial lawyer who advocates for victims and survivors of abuse and assault. Guy is very experienced. I first met him when I was covering the Ellen Greenberg case. And I thought he would be interesting to talk about in this situation because he served as an assistant district attorney in the Philadelphia District's Attorney's Office. He prosecuted high-profile cases like the infamous Philadelphia Craigslist killer. So, Guy, first of all, I wanted to get your reaction. These high-profile attorneys from California, Michael Burt and Richard Novak, coming in I think some people were surprised by that, thinking that they would just be Utah attorneys, that there wouldn't be attorneys flying in now to represent him. What do you make of it?
Think it's very common in these incredibly high profile cases. You want, arguably, whether it's right or wrong in your mind, who are the best. And if this is what has been viewed or deemed as the best by this particular defendant, Tyler Robinson, then I understand that. Now, there's a lot of, I think if you polled 100 lawyers, right, you would get 50 who say you need someone from the local community who understands the jurors, who understands the judges, because jurors are going to react better to a local attorney versus someone who, a hired gun being flown out. But then you get 50 other attorneys who will say that's doesn't matter as anywhere near as much as many people say. And that's the camp that I fall in. I practice nationally. And when you talk to these jurors, when you focus group with these individuals, I have yet to see a circumstance in which my sort of Northeastern accent, my Philadelphia accent bothers them or thinks that, there's a reason that's untoward, if you will, that I'm being brought in, or that for some reason the local attorneys aren't good enough. I just don't think jurors see that. I think what I have seen rather is when the evidence and facts are there, jurors generally want to do the right thing, and it shouldn't matter who the mouthpiece is for either side. Now, sometimes it does, depending on their behavior and how they conduct themselves, but that's larger about their personalities and less to do about where they come from.
So there've been two hearings so far with Tyler Robinson. The first time we saw him on video screen, he was in a suicide vest. This last hearing, though, he didn't appear on
I
video.
mean, normally speaking, you will see a defendant present, especially for these types of hearings. However, this is truly unique in terms of what we're looking at in terms of the political divide, the community divide. I mean, will be people who want to seek vengeance versus justice, right? And so I think there's a huge security risk. Now, look, at some point, he's going to have to show up to the courthouse, especially if there's a jury trial or a preliminary hearing. But in these early stages, I think it's more precautionary. At least that's how I see it, because if he were actually injured or something untoward happened in custody, you would imagine that that would be the first thing out of his lawyers' mouths, right? If he was harmed in any capacity or in any way was roughed up, I think you would hear that as the lead argument for some change in circumstances for him as it relates to his current incarceration.
Do you think it could have anything to do with the suicide vest? Could his defense not want him, his image out in the public like that?
It could, right? I mean, defense attorneys, some of them are very tight-lipped about their strategy. At least from what I can see, I mean, the circus of what would ensue if he were brought to the courthouse, my view is that has more to do with it than anything. But look, I could be wrong. There could be a strategic reason from either side not to have him present, but he certainly was entitled to be there.
Have you noticed anything that stood out to you in terms of holes in the prosecution's case?
I think it's very early to say whether or not there's going to be holes. I think there's a couple of things that people will start to really hyper focus on as this develops. And that I imagine is going to be the timeline, right? It is a critical component. When I was a homicide prosecutor, everything stemmed around a timeline, meaning, was it possible? Was the person that you arrested capable in terms of the time frame to do what you're say happened? Now, here, because of obviously all of the people, all of the cameras, we know precisely when Charlie was killed, when he was murdered, right? And so there's no wiggle room in terms of the timeline. It is a strict timeline. So, for example, we know that, at least from what we're hearing in terms of evidence, Tyler Robinson sent text messages to his significant other. Those towers will show, and you can't, I mean, look, you hear all these conspiracy theories, right? And there's a ton out there, and that could play, unfortunately, into some of these jurors' decisions. But I don't buy into that, right? You're going to have cell towers from reputable companies who will be able to pinpoint within a very, very small area where he sent and received those messages or phone calls from. It triangulates to a tower, and you cannot fabricate that, right? I mean, when I was a prosecutor, I was one of the privileged ones who was able to go down to the FBI and get trained by what they call their CAST system, their CAST team, which is doing the triangulation, right? Doing the cell phone data analysis. and you have to ping to your closest tower when you're using a cell phone. People don't realize that. For example, one of the analogies that our experts would use when we would use them under cell phone analysis is think about any playoff game that anyone's ever been to. Name the sport, right? And you go to send a message or you go to send make a phone call and you have full service. And you're like, why the heck? I mean, I have full service. Why can't I make a call or a text? It's because before the tower that's closest to the stadium will shoot you over to another tower if it gets overloaded, you first have to connect to that initial tower before it can do that. And if it's overloaded, it can't. What does that all mean? It means that when we see the records in terms of where was he when he sent these messages, that will prove where he was in terms of the timeline, if that makes sense.
There's also a lot of people are honing in on the prosecution has said and the investigators have said that he allegedly returned to the crime scene, the area where they found the murder weapon, and may have even had an interaction with police. But if there's no body camera video of that encounter, do you think that could be a problem for the state? Like, is that something they could hone in on?
Sure, defense attorneys will poke holes as they should in any particular set of facts, right? So these officers, presumably, given especially what happened, should have had their body cam on. They should have had body cam and they should have had it on. And if they don't, and didn't, I should say, and you would think that they would have indicated that if they did. So that makes me a little nervous. I think that's going to be somewhat of a problem. How large it depends, because it sort of snowballs or sort of ties into these conspiracy theories in terms of when you have so much attention and so many people who become, internet sleuths and internet detectives and internet prosecutors, right? All of these conspiracies are put out there, and you don't know what jurors you're going to get. You don't know what they've read, what they looked at. So all of these things sort of work together, and it can be something that's in the back of their mind. And when they make these arguments about, well, why wasn't the body cam on? We would know exactly when he approached these officers. We would know exactly what he said. And instead, they're asking you to rely upon the officer's word in the circumstances that this was happening in. Meaning, imagine, a political assassination, call it what you will. It's chaos, right? And now you expect with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that police are interacting with, they happen to remember this specific interaction and the specific words uttered by this individual when at that time, no one knew who the suspect was, right? That could be a stretch for some jurors, right? Would you remember an actual conversation when you probably had dozens, if not hundreds, even if they were quick? You're going to remember the exact words in this chaos. I think that's a problem, and I think body cam obviously will show exactly what was said or what was done in that encounter.
And you mentioned conspiracy theories. With some of these high profile cases, it's kind of like you feel like the majority of people are on the side of the prosecution. And that may be the case ultimately here, but it does seem like there's a growing contingent of people that think he may not actually be the killer. I mean, how does
Oh,
that fit into things?
oh, absolutely. And it's only going to get worse because every piece of evidence that comes out, you're going to see it. You're going to see people pick apart and dissect. And again, you don't know what jurors are seeing and what they're starting to believe. And sometimes it's not even, express bias, right? It's implicit, meaning they've read something one time and it's just in the back of their mind. And who knows what could trigger that when if that happens to be one of your jurors, right? You have people saying from a timeline perspective, this was inaccurate, and they don't even know at this point, right? The evidence isn't out there for them to know that. They're saying that the father somehow made this up for some motive that I'm not exactly clear on in terms of the confession to the father. They're saying that these text messages were made up. The gun was planted. There's so many things right now floating around, disinformation, false information. You don't even know what's true at this point, right? We have to see the actual evidence. But the problem with conspiracy theories is if they get momentum, which they are, even with the evidence, it's going to go into this vortex of a conspiracy theory, meaning, well, of course, that's what the prosecution is saying the evidence is, but it's all made up. It's all fabricated, and they're going to have a million reasons why. And it can be a real problem.
In terms of it being a political assassination from the defense standpoint, does that just open the door for them to present more theory? I mean, you know what I mean? It seems like you could have even more theories of who may have done this that wasn't Tyler Robinson.
Absolutely. I mean, you're gonna if you're depending on what their strategy is, you have a whole plethora of of potentials at your disposal in terms of what you can argue, right? For every person that loved Charlie Kirk and what he was doing and saying, the defense is going to point to an equal amount of people who absolutely hated him, right? Right or wrong, right? You're going to have as many people who hated him as loved him. And so that can be a problem for the prosecution because it's not even necessarily pointing to a other person. It's there's 350 or so million people in this country. Let me show you 125 million people. I'm being a little, ridiculous, but who hated him, right? And so that can be a problem if your evidence is not airtight, right? This is a case that can be real challenging if all you're going to rely on is circumstantial evidence. I'm someone who believes very strongly in the power of circumstantial evidence, but it better be airtight because these types of things that can poke these holes, you only need one juror to disagree and you do not win your prosecution. It can be a real problem.
Do you think this could actually get to a jury trial, or do you think that, these big lawyers are coming in just to basically eventually maybe get like a deal where there's no death penalty? Like, how do you see it playing out?
That's certainly a possibility. We see that all the time where they work the case. I saw it all the time where they worked the case up to avoid the death penalty and instead get life imprisonment or some version of that versus the death penalty. But that is going to really depend on the state's evidence, right? If it's airtight, I think you'll start to see or at least feel rumblings of is a plea possible. But on the other end, right, as a former prosecutor, you should always do the right thing, and that's justice, and that is what is right for the community and right for the case and right for the family and all of those things that tie into it. But unfortunately, when you're in these incredibly high profile, and this may be one of the largest in recent history, at least for me, in terms of the politicalization of this and how the community is incensed as they should be. But what the problem is sometimes then prosecutors aren't guided by what's right or wrong. It's there might be an election cycle or an appointment cycle, or we don't want the community mad at us, right? Or we're going to sort of go with the whims of the mob who want an eye for an eye. And I don't look, I get it. I'm not someone against that necessarily in terms of wanting that, feeling that, right? Taking off the law hat, putting on the humanity hat. It was outrageous what happened to Charlie. And that's an understatement. But I hope that the prosecution is constantly guided by the oath they took, right? Versus what is the political opinions of the current moment want.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was in Utah. I'm thinking back. I mean, I think even at the first press conference, it might have been the second, the governor said that we're going out, we want the death penalty. Um,
Sure.
so, I mean, if you're the prosecutor and you got the governor who's been saying over, I mean, how do you now not push it? How do you not go all the way?
Yeah, because all of a sudden, when you sort of go against these high profile individuals who want the death penalty, and I get it. I've pushed at times when I was a prosecutor for the death penalty. I understand it when the crime is as egregious as this is, or a crime is just egregious in its nature. Um, but the problem is when you have these pressures from the outside doing this to you, are you looking at what's the right thing to do in this case? Meaning, if the defendant is willing to plea to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, right, is that the best thing? And it may be, right, depending on the evidence and everything else. But if you're getting these pressures, all of a sudden, you might say, I get you want to plead guilty, but no, we want death, and we want death maybe for reasons other than what you should want them for, if that's what you're seeking.
It's interesting. Utah doesn't have a traditional insanity defense for
No.
criminal charges, along with Kansas, Idaho, Montana. How does that play anything? Like, what kind of defense strategy do you think we're going to see in that arena?
Yeah, so the insanity defense in Utah, from my understanding, is very strict, right? It's not your sort of, I don't want to call it run of the mill, because that's, but it's not your common, the inability to know right from wrong in the moment in which you took the life, right? That's a called an easier way to prove insanity. Here, they would have to show that it was impossible for him to form the intent. I, I, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how you could possibly do that when, if I was the prosecutor, it's like, well, let me understand something. he didn't form the intent because he was insane by reason of law. Let me understand something. That morning, he woke up. He made a decision that he was going to do this. He made a decision to go get the gun. He made a decision to buy the bullets, to load the gun, to drive the gun to the property, to then climb the building, to get on top. Right. My point is, you go through the 1,000, even be albeit small decisions that he made. If of course he's the one who did this, all the decisions he made. It's like, what do you mean he didn't form the intent? He made at least 200. I know that makes me crazy, but truly, if you think about it, 200 intentional decisions that morning before he pulled the trigger. So how could you possibly argue that he didn't have the intent? Everything he did was intentional. From waking up, deciding to do it, send the messages, get in the car, load the gun, get the gun, right, hide the gun. All of these things show intent. So I that is going to be a real, from my perspective, challenging defense for them. If it was the inability to know right from wrong in the moment that he pulled the trigger, like other states, I think it's a more plausible defense, but they don't have that at their disposal.
Do you think he could have done this all alone without any sort of, anyone even knowing that he was planning it?
Yeah, I mean, so the lone wolf sort of ideology, I think so. Yes. I mean, this these types of killings, I'm not saying he did it all alone. I'm just saying these types of killings, these types of murders from a distance with a sniper rifle, you don't really need someone else's help, right? You just don't. It, and so he could have done it with someone else, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Obviously, the text messages and the time frame of them to his significant other may show something, right? Obviously, I would imagine they're going to look pretty heavily into the family and the friends and the Discord chats and all of that. Um, but that to me would be more venting and sort of vocalizing whatever internal animus this person had. Tyler Robinson, again, assuming that he did this. But to me, this appears, unless you start to really dive into some of the conspiracy theories, meaning until I see evidence otherwise, this does look like a lone wolf type scenario.
Could it be an issue for the prosecution that, do you remember like Kash Patel, the FBI director, put out that tweet saying they had the person and then it wasn't the
Yeah.
right person? And it like happened twice, like where
Yeah.
everybody thought that, and even you even have the FBI director putting that out that we have someone being questioned. Could that come back to haunt them?
100%. I would be furious when people sort of I'll call it a political position, right? Even locally here in Philadelphia, when I was a homicide prosecutor, who would jump the gun and say, we got him, or the evidence is leaning here. No, no. The evidence is leaning there when we file an arrest warrant and have an individual arrested. In other words, when you put things out there, what happens when you do that, and I've seen it time and time again, when you put things out there like that, all of a sudden, the trial, if this is where this heads, becomes multiple sub trials, right? In other words, if you're cross-examining, whether it's Cash or someone else from the FBI, when you're cross-examining those investigators, you'll spend 2 hours talking about other people other than what's going on in this case, how they led to that decision, the evidence that they looked at, why didn't they follow up on it, right? And all it really is, and it's understandable from a defense perspective, is a distraction. If you overwhelm a jury with information, that's the best thing almost sometimes you can do as a defense attorney. You put out as many theories as you can, you put out as much evidence as you can, as much, or at least purported evidence, as much information as you can, and it's overwhelming because now, after what will likely be weeks of a jury trial, if that's where it heads, jurors now have to go in the back and sift through this. And you're going to be hearing it through a whole host of different individuals who are going to have different recollections about what was said, how it was said, when it was said, who took notes, who didn't take notes, right? All of these things play into it. So the more that the defense team, if that's how they choose to do sort of the shotgun approach of put everything out there and let's confuse, all these jurors to all get out, then that could work for them. Absolutely.
So I know we don't have all the evidence, just really the basics. We have the text messages, we have the probable cause, but what do you think? I'm just curious. Like, if you were the defense attorney, I mean, is this a case where you're like, there's some holes here? Like, what's your gut feeling?
Yeah, so they know this is an uphill battle, despite what they might say, and despite what in an uphill battle, I'm being kind, right? I mean, this is will be pretty monumental in terms to overcome at least what we know right now, right? Because quite frankly, putting aside the conspiracy theories, I think the vast majority of Americans have already convicted Tyler Robinson, right? And that's hard to overcome. I'm not saying it's right. That is not how our justice system is set up, but that is our modern day sort of era where people come to their conclusions well before you ever get to trial because they've done their own investigation or listened to this pundit versus that pundit. It's monumental to overcome. But you're going to have to look at, you're going to want to have to do the DNA testing with your own experts. You're going to want to, again, hone on that timeline, see where he was when those text messages were sent. Those are the type of things that, I mean, you can sort of do the other things we've talked about today about potential other suspects, but I think you're going to need a little more than that, right? To really sway at least one of these jurors, if that's where this heads, to change their mind and vote for the defense, so to speak. It's going to be a huge challenge. And I've been reading that the defense strategy, and I get it, is that this is going to be delayed for a whole host of time while they're digging through the evidence and going through things. I don't know that time gets better for them. Sometimes it does. But this isn't going away, meaning the politicalization of it, the pundits talking about it, it's not going away. So I don't know that the time is going to actually help them like it can in other cases. In fact, I think it might incense people further or more given the time, and they're going to become more ingrained in their strongly held beliefs about his guilt or innocence.
Do you think that the defense will go with a preliminary hearing because won't more, I mean, do they want more evidence to come out this quickly? Which way do you think that'll go?
I have seen defense attorneys not do preliminary hearings, and there are some strategic benefits to it. The most benefit that I see when a defense attorney, from my experience, didn't do a preliminary hearing is because they were gearing up for a plea, right? In other words, they want to be able to go to the next level at the court and say, listen, my client not only understands the horrific nature of his acts, he didn't put the state through the necessity, the preliminary hearing, make witnesses come in, make Charlie's wife and family go through that, right? It's almost, sort of pulling at the heartstrings of the court to show the remorse, right? That's generally when you see it. If you're not going to do that, I don't really see the major benefit in not having a preliminary hearing, because if you don't get to challenge the evidence, at least even in a little bit, until you're live at trial. And I don't understand that strategy. Yeah, it might not go great for Tyler Robinson. He's going to get held for court. I mean, that's the nature of a preliminary hearing for the most part. But the opportunity to challenge, to hear how some of these witnesses will testify, right? You don't know how they're going to testify. So if it's an ace, you need to be prepared for that. If it's someone who you think, oh, I can take shots and poke holes, you want to learn that well before you're live before a jury. So unless there's some real good reason, I would be surprised, and I would think it would be a huge misstep and a lack of opportunity if they did not have a preliminary hearing.
And just one last question back to the lawyers. I don't know why I don't in Philly, would this be unusual? I guess I just thought it was going to be public defenders from Utah. I didn't realize, I mean, apparently they've already allocated $1 million, and that, they're getting these relatively high profile, proficient, one of them has almost like 4 or 5 decades criminal law
Mm-hmm.
experience flying in for every hearing from California. Like,
Sure.
does that not seem strange to you, or is that normal, or?
Well, I don't know these defense attorneys, right? But I'll say this: one of two things, or maybe more, is going on. When you have a case like this, there will be a whole host of people who are more than willing to front the legal bills for Tyler Robinson, right? So they very well could be getting paid from outside sources, and that's how they're funding this. But on the other end, you know, this is this is going to sound so perverse, but a marketing opportunity, right? You were the attorneys in the Charlie Kirk killing, right? For your reputation, right? For your prestige, this is one of the probably highest profile cases you could possibly go on. And so some lawyers, I'm not saying it's these lawyers, but some lawyers view that as, yeah, we might even eat some of these costs, but the cases we'll get in the future that will pay as a result will pay dividends. That's how some lawyers think. And again, I'm not suggesting that's how these lawyers were thinking, but that's also something that plays into it.